Have you ever held a grudge? Well, today we are looking at literally the ultimate grudge. Let's dive right into this explainer and peel back the layers of Edgar Allan Poe's absolute classic, The Cask of Amontillado. Now, on the surface, you probably remember this as that chilling story of a man being walled up alive in a damp catacomb during a carnival. But as we'll see when we look closer at the source material, there's a ridiculously complex web of psychology, social tension, and linguistic traps hiding just beneath the surface.
Poe hooks us right out of the gate with this incredibly famous opening line. I mean, it's Montresor's chilling confession of a deeply, deeply bruised ego, a massive narcissistic injury. He's demanding absolute retribution. But did you notice what's missing here? Poe deliberately leaves out exactly what Fortunato did. We are dropped straight into the mind of a psychopath who feels so wounded by a single unnamed insult that it reveals just how monstrous and terrifying his pride actually is.
And really, that brings us to the central mystery of the whole text. This isn't your classic whodunit detective story. I mean, we know Montresor is the killer from the very first sentence. Instead, it's a mystery of motive. What kind of insult could possibly warrant such a brutal, elaborate murder? A crime that, by the way, he is still obsessing over 50 years after the fact.
So let's get into Section 1, The Vow of Revenge, and explore the intense social rivalry driving our narrator.
Just look at the dynamic between these two central figures. Montresor is playing the role of the perfect, caring friend, completely masking his deadly intentions. And Fortunato, his name literally means the lucky or fortunate one in Italian. He's wealthy, he's respected, he's admired. But as they share a drink, he is entirely blind to the trowel Montresor is hiding in his cloak, which is literally the tool of his impending doom.
Now, what's absolutely fascinating here is how Poe uses their clothing to represent this deep socioeconomic tension. Montresor represents the old, falling feudal aristocracy, right? He's wearing a black silk mask and a dark cloak called a roquelaure, so he's essentially dressing as an executioner. Fortunato, on the other hand, represents the rising, newly rich capitalist class. And what's he wearing? Motley, the tight-fitting, striped dress and bells of a literal court jester. Montresor feels his noble ancestry has been insulted by this upstart, and this whole revenge plot is basically about putting this fool back in his place.
Moving on to Section 2, Chaos of the Carnival, the absolute perfect cover for this tragedy.
The entire story takes place during the supreme madness of the carnival season, and this isn't just some colorful background, it's actually a crucial mechanism for the plot. Carnival is a time of excessive drinking and masks, which provides the perfect cover of anonymity. It's why Montresor's servants abandon his house. But more importantly, Carnival is traditionally a time when social hierarchies are flipped upside down. It's kind of like the ultimate purge of social rules. So by wearing the executioner's cloak while Fortunato plays the fool, Montresor is using that chaotic energy to act out a dark fantasy, temporarily reversing his inferior social standing and completely dominating the guy who humiliated him.
Which brings us to Section 3, Descent into the Catacombs, a literal and psychological drop into darkness.
So Montresor lures Fortunato away from the festival with the promise of a non-existent cask of rare wine, Amontillado. But here is a brilliant, totally terrifying piece of hidden wordplay. The word Amontillado is linguistically linked to Old Spanish verbs like amontijar, which means collected in a pile or piled at the mountain. This means every single time Montresor promises a taste of Amontillado, he is secretly, figuratively referencing the literal pile of bones that Fortunato is destined to become. I mean, how twisted is that?
To actually get him down into the crypt, Montresor uses what we'd probably call gaslighting today. It's a masterclass in manipulation. First, he acts incredibly thrilled to see him. Second, he exploits Fortunato's arrogance as a wine connoisseur by threatening to ask a rival, Lucuzzi, to taste the wine instead. And third, he repeatedly uses reverse psychology. He constantly fakes this deep concern for Fortunato's terrible cough, urging him to turn back. By doing this, Montresor gives his victim the illusion of choice. Fortunato insists on moving forward, willingly walking right into his own tomb.
Okay, let's look at Section 4, Symbols in the Shadows, because as the space tightens, the psychology gets incredibly deep.
Deep down in the catacombs, a very drunk Fortunato makes a bizarre gesture, revealing he's a member of the Freemasons, you know, that exclusive, wealthy brotherhood. When Montresor doesn't recognize the secret sign, Fortunato mocks him, basically saying, "Oh, you aren't one of us." But Montresor replies that he is a mason and then literally pulls a masonry trowel out of his cloak. It's an incredibly dark pun. Fortunato means the wealthy elite. Montresor means he is about to become the literal bricklayer of Fortunato's demise.
If we view this through a psychological lens, these shadows reveal even more profound depths. Take the Montresor family crest, a massive golden foot crushing a serpent whose fangs are embedded right in the heel. It's a perfect symbol for Montresor's eternal, deadly, unbreakable link to his victim. Furthermore, researchers point out that the damp, enclosed catacombs act as a psychoanalytic womb. By retreating from the world into this dark cellar, fueled by wine that acts as a sort of amniotic fluid, Montresor is acting out a morbid fantasy of rebirth, desperately trying to shed his feelings of inferiority.
This psychological intensity is perfectly mirrored in how Poe manipulates time. Notice how jarring the pacing is. We are dragged step by agonizing step through a suffocatingly slow descent into the catacombs. It takes up a massive portion of the narrative. And then, at the very end, the narrator shockingly jumps 50 years into the future in just a single sentence. It completely destabilizes your sense of reality.
Finally, Section 5, the final brick. The victim is fully enclosed. Montresor guides Fortunato into a tiny recess, barely 4 feet deep, and swiftly chains him to the granite wall. It happens so incredibly fast that Fortunato is just too astounded to resist, and as Montresor uncovers a pile of hidden building stone and begins methodically stacking the masonry layer by layer, Fortunato's drunken stupor finally wears off, entirely replaced by the terrifying realization of his fate.
As that final brick is plastered into place, sealing the heavy crypt forever, Fortunato tries one last, desperate tactic. He pretends it's all just an excellent joke. Haha, very funny. But when Montresor doesn't buy it, total silence falls. The absolute only sound Montresor hears from the suffocating darkness behind the wall is the pitiful jingling of jester bells. The so-called fortunate man has ultimately been reduced to nothing more than a fool.
Montresor ends his confession with this twisted Latin blessing, "In pace requiescat," may he rest in peace. Normally, this is what a priest would say to absolve a dying person of their sins, but Montresor ironically subverts the priest's role here. He's claiming the authority to grant his enemy eternal peace, but in doing so, he firmly cements his own lifelong guilt.
Montresor claims he wanted to punish with absolute impunity, but as the sources clearly point out, he has spent the last half-century obsessively recounting this memory. He hasn't moved on at all. He is completely tethered to that wall in the catacombs. So we really have to ask ourselves, who is the real prisoner here? Did Montresor lock Fortunato in the dark, or did he permanently entomb his own soul, leaving us to wonder just how deep the darkness of the human mind can truly go?